What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. My guest is the one and only Mike Wahle. Mike, it has been a couple of weeks since we have chatted last, and we've had the opportunity to see the Packers play against Detroit, play against Cleveland. Just want to hear your general thoughts on these last couple of weeks, where the team is, where they're headed. How are you feeling about things?
Well, first of all, Happy New Year, Andy. Good to see you again.
You too.
The last couple of weeks, we've had some close games. The Minnesota game, it's been interesting. I really like the way that we're headed into the playoffs, given the fact that we have the bye, given the fact that it looks like we're going to get Bakhtiari back. It looks like we're going to get Alexander back. And I know Smith's kind of up in the air, and I haven't really heard a lot from Myers, but I think everybody getting healthy, getting that week, and just it's not even really the week of rest that's a big deal. It's the one less game to the championship game that's the big deal, right?
Yeah.
Because as we know, if you expand the playoff field, the more games you have to play, the more chances you have to lose. So I feel pretty good about the way that everything has gone offensively. Defensively, there's been some kind of question marks. There's been some chinks in the armor, I think, that it's probably fair to say.
Yep.
Particularly in our ability to stop the run, which I think, we all know that playoff teams that can run like that travels. So the expectation is you're going to see some teams try to run the ball against the Packers, whether it's Tampa coming up here with a healthy Fournette or, St. Louis coming. It's just, we don't know how that Dallas with Ezekiel Elliott. And that has been for the last couple of weeks, something that I have as a Packer fan anxiety about. I'm sure they'll be able to correct those mistakes as we move into the playoffs, but it has to be a point of emphasis for the next couple of weeks, if anything, because you see how all the offense is playing. You see how masterful Aaron Rodgers is. You see that the special teams for the first time last week looked like they had their stuff together.
Agreed.
But then now you're looking at, okay, there's always like a new problem, right? And this happens to be the problem of the week.
Yeah. So obviously, Cleveland was a brutal run defense performance. With Dalvin, they held him to 13 yards and 12 touches. A lot of that is because Sean Mannion's the quarterback. Did you feel better about how the defense looked against the run, or was that more of just they couldn't throw? So,
yeah, I listen. Every game in the NFL is a hard game, and it's a good victory, right? But that wasn't a real team. That Vikings team was one of the worst performances, just from a competition standpoint. It wasn't even worth watching. There's so many questions, Mark, about the Minnesota Vikings game that it almost seemed like they were running a different offense. Just the progression of the quarterback, the plays that they were calling. This happens sometimes in the NFL where coaches try to outthink themselves. Like you didn't want to play the rookie. You had the opportunity to play the rookie. I think they were very adamant about the fact that they didn't want to see him. And I think after the game, Zimmer's like, I don't want to see him anymore, which was odd, right? That whole situation is a little bit odd. But in these situations, you have to look at it when you're putting a game plan together. The message that you're sending your team on Wednesday matters, right? And so if you come into the game, like it's one thing if Aaron Rodgers is not playing, all of a sudden Jordan Love has never had a start. He comes in the game. You can look at your team in the eye and be like, hey, we can still beat the Kansas City Chiefs. We play good defense. We run the football. We're going to keep this playbook super simple because the Green Bay Packers know they have the best player in the league.
right.
When you're the Minnesota Vikings and you've kind of been in a lot of close games and you're kind of a 500 team and you have a chance to win all these games, when you come in on a Wednesday and you're like, all right, well, we're just going to change our game plan and go super conservative, the players on the team know that the game's over, right? They're never going to say that, and they're playing for a number of different reasons. But when you find out that the coaching staff doesn't have faith that you can execute, or the guy behind the center can't execute, the game's pretty much over for that team, unless, again, you're coming from a place of real confidence, which I think, at least from an offensive standpoint, the Packers can come from.
Yeah, we've talked about, body language for players in the past. Some of that second half body language for the Vikings wasn't the best. And I agree with you 100% in regards to, I don't think you can take much from that game. I've seen people even write about and talk about, like, if Green Bay can play like that in the playoffs, they're going to be, Super Bowl champs. And I'm just like, yeah, it was a nice performance. You take the win, but that Minnesota team was not, you can't base anything off of what they put on the field on Sunday, in my opinion.
Yeah, and we're still talking if we just go back a couple games before that, and we look at the Browns game, we look at the Ravens game, you start going, okay, well, what are the question marks headed into the playoffs, really?
Yep.
Defensively, because I don't really think we have question marks on offense, except can we get a couple guys healthy on the offensive line? That would be great, right? But everything else is just kind of makes sense right now. You have guys making plays. You guys have guys feel comfortable that they can excel in this offense. But defensively, you're still playing that two shell, right? And two shell is predicated on, for me, two shells predicated on you can get home with 4, which we've been able to do. Are we able to get home with 4 against Tampa with Tom Brady? I don't think so.
Right.
Maybe. Are we able to get home against the Dallas Cowboys offensive line with a healthy Smith? I don't think so. I think it's going to take a little bit more than that. Dak holds the ball a little bit longer, but you just start looking at like matchups and forward thinking. That may become an issue. But the biggest thing is on the back end, do your safeties understand the geometry of tackling, of coverage, of leverage positions? And we've talked about it at length. Amos seems to.
Yep.
Savage doesn't. And again, he's showed up in the last 3 weeks he still doesn't quite understand the geometry of the position as it pertains to coming into confrontation. And that is it really stood out in the Cleveland game. But again, when you look at the best teams in the league, having to play them consecutively with the talent they have at the skill positions, that is a concern, I think. It's something that you have time to fix. It's actually a very quick fix. You just have to be able to shine a light on the problem, address the problem in the meeting room, and translate that to the practice field.
No, that makes sense. I do have a question for you on the offensive side of the ball, though, because you said you don't have any concern. My one concern on offense, and I'm curious if you'll agree or disagree, we've seen this Green Bay offensive line hold up, but for the most part, they've had to hold up in ideal situations and circumstances, meaning they haven't been behind big. They haven't been in situations where they're forced to throw the ball, and Aaron Rodgers hasn't been in situations where they, haven't, where he's had to like hold the ball, and, he's basically been able to get rid of the ball pretty quickly. My one concern is if you get into a situation in the playoffs where, you're down, 10 with, a quarter and a half left or whatever the case may be, you have to throw your way back in the game. And all of a sudden the Shaq Barretts and the JPPs of the world once again, or whomever it is that you're playing, has the ability to tee off on that offensive line. And there's no threat of play action. There's no threat of the run. There's no threat of jet motion. It's just drop back and pass. Will that 5 offensive line set up as is? Now, if they get Bakhtiari and Myers back, Turner back, maybe it's a different story. But as is, can that offensive line stay together in that situation? That's my one concern with the offense heading into the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely fair. And you're probably right that they cannot. But we haven't been able to. We've been able to navigate around that, not put ourselves in that position. We've been in 2-minute drills. We've been in close games where they have to score at the end. So they've done a pretty good job against NFL competition. I think the way to look at that, though, is just to look last year versus the LA Rams and how they game planned for Aaron Donald and all those great pass rushers that they had last year. And then what happened? Injury. They come back against Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and all of a sudden they switch Billy and they're running a lot of scat protection. Like you're talking about, JPP shows up and it's problem city, right?
Yeah.
And what we don't understand is the psychology from the quarterback perspective, probably nowadays with Aaron, unless he gets his bell rung really bad, the psychology of taking a sack early probably isn't that big of a deal. From like we saw Robert Quinn and they had back-to-back sacks in the Bears game, doesn't really bother him. Yeah. But the psychology of the gravity of playing in the NFC Championship game, for example, and you give up a sack in the first series, you give up a sack in the second series, and listen, we're going to be dropping back the entire game. What that does to a younger, inexperienced offensive line, what it does to an offensive line in general, but what it does to an inexperienced offensive line, that can be soul crushing. And so we certainly don't want to get down 14, down 21 early to the point where Matt LaFleur decides we need to switch the game plan out. We're going to go scat again. Because when I looked at last year's LA Rams game versus the Bucs game, it was like I know they're different defenses, but it was almost like 2 completely different teams that showed up on offense just from the way that they wanted to execute their game plan.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think they're going to be able to navigate that. And I think there's a decent chance that they don't even get in that position in the first place. But when you have a quarterback like Rodgers, he's able to, help you get through a lot of those situations. He's been so good at getting rid of the ball so quickly that it's been really fun to watch. And it's certainly helped that line out as well. Before I forget, I have to ask you, we saw a pretty fun moment from Garrett Bradbury catching a deflection and rumbling 20 yards. Something. Did you ever have a Garrett Bradbury moment?
Oh, so that was like super athletic. So I never had one of those moments, but I did. So I don't know if you can ever pick it up on NFL films or anything, but I caught a ball. We were getting a heads beat in by the New Orleans Saints down in New Orleans back in the day when it was like that real turf, that like full out of concrete turf.
Yep.
And Norman Hand, like the ball hit the back of his helmet and it dropped into my arms, and I ran forward, and I forgot who the linebacker was. It was like 5 yards. It was so pathetic. And I thought, like, I'm going to give this guy everything. Remember, I played tight end before. Like I've held the ball in my hand with so much of my life. So I hit him and I fall down. And, I just where I get tackled, right? So I'm like, okay, we'll go to the next play. We're down. Who cares? But then we look on it on tape, and I literally ran over there and like put my head down. I think he just took like a step back and I fell on the ground. Like it was so pathetic that when I saw Bradbury won the day for me, even though they were terrible and they lost the game. Like for me, that was a play of the day, man. That was awesome.
No, it was like, I think I tweeted at the time, it was like my favorite Vikings play of all time. You can have your Stephon Diggs moment of like winning the big playoff game at the last second, but as a Packer fan, nothing quite beats, seeing an offensive line catch a pass like Franco Harris at the ankles and bring it 20 plus yards the other way. How can you even be mad as a Packer fan? Like you still have to enjoy that. So especially when you're winning by that much at the time.
The only thing that rivals that, honestly, is when, I don't know if you remember this game, but when I forgot who they were playing, but Mark Tauscher they brought in Gray Rugermer and they put Tauscher at tight end, and Tauscher caught a touchdown pass and did instead of the Lambeau leap, he did like the Shamu up on the, like, where there's like a 5 foot tall fence. He Shamu'd up on the side. And damn Gray Rugermer, who's like their player engagement guy now, he had like a holding call on the players. They canceled it out.
Oh,
it was like we went from euphoria. Like I'm in my living room just like screaming. My wife's like, "What's wrong?" I go, "Tausch just scored." It was this big deal for everybody, And then Rugermer, of course, like all linemen do, we're all buddies. Like you get like the offsides or the holding call, or whatever. It's like that was the closest to glory we collectively as a group we ever got.
Yeah, the only other one that I can relate was the time where the Packers were playing the Patriots and the offensive lineman had like the 70-yard kickoff return. Yeah,
that was amazing. Yeah,
that was also amazing. But all right, let's go to Packers Lions, because I do really want to pick your brain on this one. Of course, the conversation is rust versus rest. Do you sit out the 3 weeks before the divisional round, having the bye, and then having the game that doesn't matter this week? You as a player, would you have wanted to play? Would you have wanted the week
absolutely.
off? Sure. Yeah.
Absolutely want to play. Don't want to take 2 weeks off for any reason whatsoever. Players, there's this narrative that if you don't want to play, that means you don't love football. I think one of the Herb Street or one of those clowns decided that was the narrative for the bowl game deal. That's not true at all. There's like if you're beat up and you don't feel like a week off is going to help you, that's one thing. Taking 2 weeks off, that is a lot of time. And especially, I think it's a crucial week. If you can get, like, let's call Bakhtiari. If you can get Bakhtiari back and he can get a game in with the first team against a team that is going to play hard. Dan Campbell's got those kids playing hard, right? They're not that talented, but they play hard. So if you can get good reps, whether it's any of those guys, I think that pays off in spades when the playoffs start for the Green Bay Packers. So I would absolutely, I don't know if it's for the whole game, but I would absolutely go out there with a full-on game plan, starters trying to win the game, get your reps. We can't, like, the crystal ball thing, whether or not you're going to get injured, man, you can get injured walking down the street. I know there's a risk, there's a risk profile there that I'm kind of washing over, but I think it's more worthwhile to just go ahead and be yourself, go out and play. And then if you're in a situation where you're up 20 or you're down 20, maybe you pull the plug.
Yeah. And I think one of the other things too is that I think if you're playing, your starters together and everything, I think when everything's in rhythm and consistent, and because your best players are out there, you might actually have less, risk of injury than if all of a sudden you went like half and half, right? Like, all right, we're going to sit out Rodgers and Adams and, a couple other guys. Yeah. Maybe you protected your top 5 guys, But now because everything, because Love's holding the ball longer or not getting the, ball where it's supposed to right on time, like everything being a beat off and a little bit inconsistent than what you're expecting, I feel like actually opens up more opportunities for injuries and things to go as you wouldn't normally expect them. So yeah, maybe you've protected the top 5 or 10 of your guys that you actually didn't play, but in the process may have actually given opportunity to injury for a variety of other players on the team by not kind of going through your normal game like you normally would.
Yeah, Eddie, you nailed it. And every team in college, there's that guy who is like kind of like all heart, no talent, right?
Right.
And that guy in practice is going 100 miles an hour, but he's always on the ground. He's always at your ankles. He's always at your knees, right? And that's kind of what happens in an NFL game when you start bringing in the backups and you're playing a new right guard, or you're playing a new quarterback, because for all the reasons you just said, they're over anxious. They're not ready. They're not playing at that same game speed, and they're just on the floor more often. And when you're on the floor behind other people, that's how people get hurt. When you're too anxious, you're throwing the ball high in the middle of the field. That's how people get hurt. So you're absolutely right. It's funny. Like there's literally one of those guys. I know there's a guy on every high school football team, but there's a guy in every college team as well. There's probably a guy on every pro team that you're just like, man, that guy's got all heart, no talent, right? But he's a complete liability because there's just a disconnect. And they're always around you. That's why linemen wear knee braces, man.
You're playing 1,000,000 miles per hour, but you don't know if you're going to hit your guy, the opposing guy. He's going to hit anything that moves.
We call him a scud missile.
You're
a scud missile, man. You pop it out of the back of the trunk. You turn on CNN to see where it hit.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Speaking of Dan Campbell, am I crazy if I were an NFL GM and I got my choice between the current situations in Detroit, Chicago, or Minnesota? Am I crazy that I think Detroit might actually have the best situation moving forward over the next handful of seasons?
Of the three?
I feel
they
like
don't have they don't have a quarterback.
Do any of the, well, I mean, Cousins is getting paid a ton of, I don't know. You're right. Cousins is probably still the safest bet, but.
So here's the deal. So I don't think the Detroit Lions are going to win a championship in the next 5 years.
Agreed.
Okay. So I could be wrong, but Kirk Cousins is never going to win a championship. Right? It just doesn't seem like with the amount of money he's commanded and the level, it's like you have Trent Dilfer, but you don't get the Ravens defense.
Right.
You know what I mean? That's probably not maybe that's not fair, but that's kind of how I see it.
Yep.
And now you have Justin Fields in Chicago. If I'm a GM, or if I'm a prospective coach, I would want to go to Fields, because I just see endless opportunities for a guy with his skill set on grass, outside. I just see unlimited opportunities, right? And they have a legit defense. I told you about Robert Quinn at the beginning of the year. Like, yeah, he's legit, and you can build around him. And then you have some other huge pieces there. So I like that. I will say this about Dan. I know Dan from Miami, and I knew him as a player, and we have mutual friends when he was on the Cowboys, Marco. And Dan is an incredible motivator. Those guys are you can tell they're willing to play hard. I love the fact that he's brought in people that have experience, and it's almost kind of with the Detroit Lions. I hope it works out, because he's brought in so many ex-players that, selfishly I go, oh man, I hope it works, because we've all kind of been saying, man, like, you need to hire more ex-players to teach these guys how to actually play the game.
Right.
So I don't know if the ownership, like whenever you have years and years of not being good, you have to stop looking at the general manager, the new coach. You have to start looking at ownership.
Yeah.
Right. If you have decades of being a bad team, it's because the owner. Robert Kraft bought the Patriots in like 96, and they were in the Super Bowl, or 94, and they were in the Super Bowl in 96. Do I have that right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
then against Packers. Yeah.
It's not a coincidence. Like, you have to have good ownership. The New York Jets. Listen, when Gase went to the New York Jets, like, I know the guys that were in that building. It's not just the coaching staff, right? There's a lot of other bad things going on. So I think I'm actually rooting for DC and his staff. I hope they do really well. Obviously not on Sunday or anytime they're playing the Packers, but I'm rooting for those guys. I love the way that they motivate their players, and for me, that's like getting buy-in is half the battle.
Yeah, and ownership culture is one of the least talked about, most important factors in the NFL that just goes completely unsaid. Like, there's a reason some of these teams, like you said, are 4-decade-long losing franchises. You look at what happened what's happening in Washington over the course of since Dan Snyder got there. You see a toxic culture with ownership, and it's going to trickle down to the team every single time. And it doesn't get talked about enough because it can tank it. Like, it doesn't matter how good of players you draft and how good of players you sign. If it's a toxic culture, it's just going to be really difficult to win. All right, let's talk some offensive line. Let's talk some fun stuff. I want to get your opinion on who you think is the MVP of the offensive line this season. It's a little bit difficult because players have been in and out, but who would you say is the MVP of the Packers O-line this year?
The guy that I like watching the most is the left guard, JRJ.
Yeah,
by far. I just like this physical presence. For me, this season has been the MVP is probably Stenavich.
Yeah,
honestly, the MVP is probably Stenavich. Because he's made something out of a lot of guys that you don't think would be successful as a unit. So I'd probably give Stenavich the MVP. I just really like the way John Runyon Jr. plays. I think Royce Newman has, for a rookie, you just got to remember how hard it is to play as a rookie. And he wasn't like one of those guys like Slater who comes in like, yeah, you're gonna be the dude. You know what I mean? Like, he's got a lot of growing to do. So I think he's done a really good job, and I probably don't give him like enough props, but I just like the way JRJ plays. Like, Lee tries to finish the game, finish the run game and in the pass game. Josh has been great. Even Dennis Kelly's played pretty well, man. I thought when Billy Turner went out, like, especially after he went out in the game, and then I think Dennis gave up a sack or a hold like immediately. I was like, oh man, here we go, because I've seen him play with Tennessee long enough to know that he's just a really tall dude. It's hard to pass block when you're that tall, right? Yep. Leverage wise. But when you have a guy like we do in the backfield, Aaron's just been so good and kind of been able to make everything work, like you talked about earlier. But yeah, honestly, probably Stenavich. And then for my money, if you're gonna make me go watch somebody, I'm gonna go watch John Runyon Jr.
Agree on both accounts, 100%. Steno deserves a ton of credit. I think the entire organization does for how they've handled the entire situation, from the depth building to Rodgers getting rid of the ball quicker to LaFleur and Hackett game plan. I think all of it's just been phenomenal. But to have the five guys that they've had these last few weeks and still be as successful as they have, everyone deserves a lot of credit. But yeah, John Runyon Jr., to me, he's played, I think, in every game. I don't think he's missed one yet. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but either way, I think he's been the most consistent player, hasn't missed much time. And yeah, I'm 100% in lockstep with you there. Speaking of the O-line, one of the questions I've seen come up is about David Bakhtiari. And let's just say he's not able to play at all against Detroit this week. Would you, do you have confidence, and would you have confidence in him stepping into a playoff scenario where he hasn't played all year and being sort of this interesting variable that's at left tackle? Or would you rather stick with the status quo and say, hey, I know what's working is working right now, we're not going to introduce something new? How would you kind of go about that process?
I would let him be the deciding factor. If he thinks he can play, he's the best player on their line, and it's not even close.
Yep.
I don't care if he was out for 3 years; he's still the best player on the line. So he's definitely going in if he can play, and I hope he can, because as well as Josh has played, you still, if you actually watch the film, it's not the same.
Exactly. So, I again, 100% in lockstep there as well. I think if he feels like he can go, and obviously the medical staff feels like he can go, then to me, you put him out there. And if he struggles, he struggles. And I wouldn't put it by Bakhtiari either. If he gets out there for 15 snaps and he just doesn't have it to say, for him to say, you know what, I can't go or whatever. But I trust him unequivocally. And like we kind of talked about earlier offline, of like even like an 80% Bakhtiari, I'm trusting in that scenario. So yeah, I think you have to play him. I think he deserves the right to play and make that decision. And what kind of you're mentioning as well about Yash, of like, he deserves so much credit for the level that he's playing at. But I will also say that, like, again, if you're watching closely, I'm curious. I don't know if you caught it on like the early, but like, there's a handful of snaps in the first half of the game where he's like holding hands with the opposing defensive lineman. I've never seen that. Like, obviously hands are usually inside, but like they're literally both like grabbing hands and going back and forth. I don't think I've ever seen anything like, is that a technique? Is that a normal thing? I've never seen that.
Yeah, that happens sometimes actually in the interior line. You don't see it because they're all covered up, but it's guys trying to wipe. A lot of the new movements are get into the bull and then work the hands off by grabbing wrists, right? That's what we always talk about. Like, they want to smell your breath before they make their move. Sure. And so when you start doing that, the hands go out here outside the cylinder, and now it looks like they're dancing almost, right? So that's really, it's just understanding the technique of how to get your wrist back free and get your hand back inside.
Gotcha. No, that makes sense. But yeah, no, there's still definitely some areas where he can continue to improve. Like I said, I'm so impressed with what he's
done. He's done great. He's done great, but listen, Bakhtiari was, best guy in the league until he got hurt.
No question about it. All right. We're running out of time here. We've got about 5 minutes left, but I want you, because you had this awesome tirade about which penalty in the NFL you would like to see. I'll just let you take over and go on your spiel, because you and Aman talked about it. It was amazing. And I just want to rehash that and see what your ultimate opinion is on what you'd erase.
Well, so the thing was, if you could erase 2 or 3 of these ridiculous penalties, like right this year, just no votes needed, just make some sweeping demand. Was it going to be the targeting penalty? Was going to be the tuck rule? Was going to be you can't hit a quarterback low? What were the penalties that made the most, or the celebration penalties, the taunting penalties? So number one, I think the easy one was taunting.
Yeah. Right.
Because the taunting penalty has just been anything that's changing the game that doesn't have anything to do with the game because of the referees. Anytime you involve the referee more, it's a problem, right? You're involved. That's just gratuitously involving the referee more than you need to. The second thing that I would take away is targeting, because we've had so many wide receivers come out and say, like, I don't want you to take my knee or my ankle out because you'll end my career. I'm okay getting knocked out, right? Like I would tell you the same thing. I know there's, the concussion movie came out. We have CTE studies. Like I understand all that. You're asking people who have spent their entire lives to work towards one thing to make a decision on whether or not they want to get knocked out with the potential for something down the road, or in the immediacy lose everything by losing their knee. And what we've done, Tom Brady said this earlier in the year, but I think in the preseason, we are penalizing defenses for poor decisions by quarterbacks because the way the rules have changed. And my whole point was, if you allow targeting again, because remember, it's not just targeting from the defensive standpoint. Ahman Green could no longer duck his head and plow forward on a 3rd and 3 because you put your head down. Now the offensive player is targeting, right? Or a similar penalty. So my whole point was, it'll force players to clean up the game. When you take away safety measures, what happens? Well, what really happens after all of the first wave of penalty flags and a couple of injuries, athletes are forced to adapt. And when they adapt, they'll become better technicians. Quarterbacks will become better decision makers. Quarterbacks will no longer throw high balls down the middle of the field. They won't put their people in bad situations, just like they did in the 80s and they did in the 90s. Like, the game will just revert back to these people actually being better at their craft because we're not protecting them with poor calls. That's the way I see the game. So,
yeah, I understand that. I'd like to see some of, like, I don't know. I would like the egregious ones, like the one, like the old, Chuck Cecil style hits where, he's specifically lowering his head on a guy over the middle to take him out and, specifically trying to go helmet to helmet. I still would like to see those not in the game in any capacity. But
so even if you went shoulder to, right, it's because what we're talking about really is what shoulder contact is what we need to do anyways. But what we're really talking about, Andy, is like the level changes with the receiver that end up in helmet to helmet.
Yeah.
You can't call those.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's one of those are one of the ones that I hate, where like the defender's coming in and then the player like makes an adjustment at what level they're at, or they duck or they go low. And then it ends up a helmet to helmet. And it's like, I was going for the midsection and then they lowered their center of gravity, like whatever. And it ends up a helmet to helmet. Like, I don't know. I think at some point, and with all of these, right, it like, I hate all the taunting stuff. Like you said, it's just adding more referees, but like in some of like the catches and the helmet to helmets and the roughing, like it's an imperfect game. And I get it. Like these things are never going to be perfect. There's always going to be gray area and they're going to have to figure out what to call and what they're not. But I feel like as you kind of mentioned, the less we can put on the referees and the more that we can just let the game be the game, I think it's going to be a better overall product. And I think they have to figure that out, because you can try to police the game to death, but it's just going to ultimately, I don't know that it's even making things better, and it's becoming a worse product overall.
Yeah, I can tell you from my perspective, It is not making the game better.
Yeah.
I think the players are not as technically advanced as they used to be and decision-making advanced as they used to be for the reasons we just stated, because we're protecting them. And maybe, the kind of the worst thing about all of this is that it slows down the game. Like, how many times do you sit and watch this game? It's like, oh, there's another penalty. Yeah. Or how many times are players now talking about the referees? I can't remember a game where I came out of the game and like, well, let's chalk that one up to the refs. You hear that every week now.
Yeah.
And it's just unfortunate.
And one of my least favorite things is when there's when somebody scores a touchdown, like you can't even like celebrate in the moment, because like you have to see like, all right, was there like, is there a challenge? Is there a flag? Was it really a touchdown? Like you have to check everything. And then you're like, once it's all confirmed, and then the celebration's like done at that point. Mike, we got to get out of here. Thanks so much for joining me. Always appreciate you. Enjoy this epic Packers-Lions game on Sunday. Hopefully no injuries and then get out of it clean. Enjoy your week. We'll be back here next week to discuss everything and get ready for the playoffs. Anything you want to plug on the way out?
No, man. Just hit me up on Twitter, MikeWell68, Prostitute Perform on Instagram. We'll be talking about Packers stuff all weekend.
All right. Enjoy. Until next time. And as always, go Pack Go.